which is obviously the official voice of the business community. Their headline is "Wary Investors Play Defense and Switch to Dividend Stocks." Rattled by the threat of trade restrictions and a slowing economy is the lead. Investors are turning to a classic defensive play. And then if you look at the top of business and finance this morning, starting out the week, markets wake up to new reality. And James McIntosh talks about problems with stocks. Tesla, some stocks falls are extraordinary. Tesla is down 45% from its high in mid-December. Talks about the big tech firms and the Russell 2000 index of smaller companies were down more than 10%. Both are lower than they were on election day. The S&P 500 is below where it stood on November 5th, and the dollar has dropped sharply. Just a lot of economic concerns. And, of course, this weekend, of course, Washington buzzing about the question Donald Trump didn't answer.
Yeah, well, he isn't ruling out the possibility that the United States could head into a recession this year as his economic policies cause uncertainty on Wall Street. Take a listen.
Are you expecting a recession this year?
I hate to predict things like that. There is a period of transition because what we're doing is very big. We're bringing wealth back to America. That's a big thing. And there are always periods of, it takes a little time. It takes a little time. But I think it should be great for us. I mean, I think it should be great.
So as Joe showed, the front page of the Wall Street Journal this morning reports on how investors rattled by the threat of trade restrictions and a slowing economy are now turning to a classic defensive play, dividend stocks. And with Americans remaining concerned about inflation and the looming threat of tariffs, consumer confidence fell sharply last month, the largest one-month drop since 2021. Meanwhile, layoffs among U.S. employers in February were up 245% from the month prior and were at their highest level in nearly 5 years. This, as CNBC points out, that for 7 straight weeks since Elon Musk went to Washington to join the Trump administration, shares in his automaker have declined. It's the longest such losing streak for Tesla in its 15 years as a public company.
I mean, I just have to check the numbers again. David Ignatius, Tesla down 45% from its high in mid-December when, of course, the stock shot up. But it is fascinating. This is something that we've all been talking about since the election, that we have a strong economy. It's the envy of the world, but we have to be careful. And specifically that the incoming administration has to be careful with talk of tariffs and also instability. And you just look at the numbers and you see how stocks have been going up and down and how erratically things are going. And now this weekend, even President Trump not willing to suggest that his policies might not drive this country into a recession. Talk about the impact. Obviously, we've seen consumer confidence down. We saw also last week reports that people failing to make payments on their automobiles on those loans at least a decade long high. Talk about it's impacting us here and also around the world.
So, Joe, I think investors are reckoning with all the uncertainties that are part of Trump's program. We've had a frantic 6 weeks, big changes announced every day. I think Wall Street's beginning to wonder just where this leads. The tariff wars in particular seem to many investors that I talk to be potentially counterproductive, inflationary. The adjustment to the manufacturing economy that Trump seems to want could take many, many years. Wall Street's worried about that process. Back in January, when I was at the Davos World Economic Forum, I remember hearing from several investors, financial markets then were priced to perfection plus, a couple people told me. So when you're at perfection plus, there's a lot of room to slide down, and we're seeing that now. And it's interesting that Trump, rather than making the usual blandishments about everything's fine, don't worry, is saying, yeah, a recession may be ahead. I can't rule that out. He made a very interesting comment yesterday that I did pay attention to, where he said China works on a 100-year cycle of planning, and the United States goes quarter to quarter. Something I've heard from corporate CEOs for years. And I think he's right about that. I mean, it's not to endorse the policies, but we do tend to get so caught up in these short-term movements that we forget about what will be good for the long run in the country. But in any event, Wall Street's got the jitters today.
Yeah, and Donald Trump clearly trying to do something very big to the American economy, basically bring it onshore almost all manufacturing, make it a much more closed-off economy. That's the kind of thing, that's the kind of revolution in an economy that takes time. And I guess he's getting frustrated with already within 6 or 7 weeks, starting to see the headlines in the Wall Street Journal, in the Financial Times, in the Economist magazine this week, saying that he could be about to tip the American economy into recession. What I'm hearing from people on Wall Street, Mika and Joe, is that this was not necessary. The economy was going along fine. But I guess if you're trying to fundamentally overhaul the American economy to make it much more in domestic production, a domestic market, then you're going to have those disruptions. And that is the price you're going to pay. And he's just going to have to hope he can do it quickly enough, which I think is why we're seeing so much speed now, that by the time it comes to the election in 2028, voters have forgiven his party, if not him, as he won't be running again.
Right, and by the way, both are exactly right. I mean, this is a transition, and if you're going to bring all of these jobs back on shore, you know, it took 30 years, 40 years of globalization to spread it out. It's going to take more than a year, or it's two, to bring it back, and there are going to be costs. But as a great economist, Dave Chappelle said, and I think he may have gone like John Maynard Keynes to King's College in Cambridge. He said, do we really want to buy $9,000 iPhones? Probably not.
Right.